Today, Lecture 8 will be devoted to the age of Pope. That's Alexander Pope, 1700-1750. Alexander Pope is indeed the key figure of the age, which is also known as the Augustan Age, since classicism triumphed and the golden days of Emperor Augustus and the rules of Horace seemed to have returned. The period lasted roughly to the end of the lifetime of this arch-representative of classicism, Alexander Pope. You see, he died in 1744. Under the reigns of Queen Anne, George I, and George II, England entered a period of spiritual calm after more than a century of violent religious upheavals. Though still politically divided, as witnessed the Jacobite uprisings, ending with the defeat of Bonnie Prince Charlie at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. Though Catholics and other religious minorities were still oppressed, the hydra of Puritanism finally quietened down. Though fervent Methodism arose around 1739 and ultimately broke off from the Church of England, it did not seek for a political translation, and its appeal was socially limited. Mainstream Anglicanism became for most a soft sort of reasonable theism or even deism. Now, if you're interested in those philosophical concepts, again, I'm recommending take a close look at the footnotes. And only the poorest, first and foremost Welsh and Northern peasants, joined this revival. Formal, evangelical, low church piety and no popery slogans persisted, but overall a page had been turned. The Whigs and Tories still bitterly fought each other for control of government. Revolution involving matters of faith as the real or alleged ideological substratum was no longer on the cards. Likewise, the intellectual elites and aristocratic patrons of literature and the arts probably had enough of Restoration looseness and opted for reason, reasonableness, and good taste. Morality returned, but a soft, tempered kind of morality. To give you an example, the worst that could happen now was London opera audiences asking Handel to compose biblical oratorios instead of narrating, say, the risque love adventures of Jove, that's Jupiter. Moreover, the slow rise of the urban middle classes and their early access to literary culture meant the emergence of sentiment, another key concept for the period. Quiet emotions, giving superior value to the family and the individual rather than to the clan or lineage. Heroes moving away from megalothymia, great aspirations, hubris, passion. On the contrary, giving priority to measured elegance. Actually, the 18th century was born. Moreover, the progress of science supported such reduction to rules. Though interested himself in alchemy in his spare time, Isaac Newton had published his Principia in 1687 and established universal laws of movement and gravitation. He was elected undisputed as President of the Royal Society in 1707. The universe was now definite and stable. As Pope memorably put it, it was now time to cease to be fools, a word which, together with dunces, les cancres, he repeats time and time again in his verse to refer to people lacking taste and reasonableness, especially when trying to act the angel and ending up acting the beast. Now, the line I'm about to quote has remained proverbial in the language. For fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Distrustful sense where modest caution speaks. This is from his Essay on Criticism, 1711, and it summarizes everything. We'll start with verse, and of course this verse is reasonable, and Alexander Pope is the prime example. His strict adherence to classicism did not prevent him from writing admirable verse, from very wise, just as the quotation I have mentioned, to very funny. Even arch-romanticist Lord Byron thought him a sterling reference in the English language. He was the grand master of the perfectly polished heroic couplet. However, he was born too far from such a state of balance and quiet enjoyment of life. In fact, he was born to disadvantage. He was a Catholic and had been barred from a university education. Never mind, he was wonderfully self-taught. Likewise, he was a cripple all his life with tuberculosis of the spine, and nonetheless, he reached the heights of society. His essay on criticism won him instant fame and the friendship of two key writers of the age, whom we will mention later, Addison and Steele. Next came his narrative masterpiece, The Rape of the Lock, 1712. This has nothing to do with rape in the modern sense. This is about the taking of a lock of hair. It is a mock epic, using Homeric proportions to narrate a society anecdote, Lord Peter having snipped off a lock from Mrs. Arabella Fermor's head without permission. The verse is at times so elegant, funny, and clever, one just cannot resist. So maybe I should take you to an excerpt which is provided in the supplement to the course brochure. And there you have it. Maybe I should use the full screen mode. Right, there we are. So as you can see, spelling has now become standardized. There are only small little quirks like this use of apostrophe you find. Otherwise, it's fairly easy to read. And it corresponds to this general reasonableness and obedience to rules I have mentioned. These are, of course, heroic couplets, pentameters rhyming A, B, B, etc., etc. Sometimes you've got I rhymes, like you see here, shone, lone, beams, but of course it's not pronounced teens, it's tens, of course. Nonetheless, the music you will hear is perfectly regular. This is about the heroine of the story, Arabella, dressing up and coming out to her usual London society circles, walking down the streets and being just like the sun, universally admired. Not with more glories in the ethereal plain, the sun first rises o'er the purpled main. The main, of course, is the sea. Then, issuing forth, the rival of his beams launched on the bosom of the silver Thames. Fair nymphs and well-dressed youths around her shone, but every eye was fixed on her alone. On her white breast a sparkling cross she wore, which Jews might kiss and infidels adore. Her lively looks a sprightly mind disclose, quick as her eyes and as unfixed as those. Favours to none, to all she smiles extends. Oft she rejects, but never once offends. Oft, of course, is often. Bright as the sun, her eyes the gazers strike, and like the sun they shine on all alike. Yet graceful ease and sweetness void of pride might hide her faults if bells had faults to hide. If to her share some female errors fall, look on her face and you'll forget them all. You see, the music might sound a bit repetitive and humdrum, but it's intended like that. It's supposed to be soft, expectable, reasonable, perfectly ordered. There is humor. There is even a religious, very daring comparison between Well, the girl and the son going very far, going as far as saying she's a deity to be personally adored. Uh, she's got a cross on her breast, which even Jews might kiss and infidels adore. But, it's limited. It never goes too far. Compared to the Restoration portrayal of women, this is miles away. It's funny, it's full of wit, but it's very, very moderate. It's graceful, a typical value of this age of classicism and reasonableness. Pope, of course, was a great satirist. He liked to demolish people he didn't like, including, for example, one of his pet hates, the poet laureate Colley Cibber. He wrote in 1728 another mock epic, the Dunciad. Here, for instance, you have the finale of Book 4, which celebrates the absolute triumph of Dunces, les conques. Lo, thy dread empire, chaos, is restored. Light dies before thy uncreating word. Thy hand, great Anarch, lets the curtain fall, and universal darkness buries all. Of course, it's sort of funny because he celebrates the triumph of stupidity, but it's also very meaningful because chaos is a synonym for stupidity. Not only that, chaos is compared to some sort of anti-God, anti-Christ. Christ is, of course, the creating word. He is the Logos. God created the world with words. And here you have the uncreating word. You see, stupidity, lack of obedience to rules, will end up uncreating the world, will end up with another synonym, anarchy, chaos. At the end of it, the extinction of light, universal darkness burying everything. So you see, Alexander Pope understands his duty as a poet to fight stupidity and lack of reason almost as a sort of religious duty to preserve the light in the world, because it is permanently under threat from chaos. His grand principles were somehow recapitulated with his essay on man, which is didactic and theistic. Nonetheless, Pope was not always himself faithful to these principles. Here, for instance, I have provided an excerpt from Windsor Forest, a descriptive poem in which you may find the earliest glimpses of a genuine feeling for real nature. So if you really want to appreciate Pope and understand him, you have to realize he's not just a monolithic defender of classicism and sound reason. On the right, you've got Windsor Forest. On the left, you've got the essay on man. So I'll start with the principles from the essay on man, and I'll let you compare them to what he does, really painting nature. First, he will argue that nature and reason are one and the same thing, that nature is the author of rules, and that following rules is nothing artificial, but natural, on the contrary. The rules of old discovered, not devised, are nature still, but nature methodized. Nature, like liberty, is but restrained by the same laws which first herself ordained. Learn hence, for ancient rules a just esteem. To follow nature is to follow them. Right. And now he will describe a pheasant in the forest. See, from the brake is the bracken, as kind of a fougère buisson. The whirring pheasant springs and mounts, exulting on triumphant wings. Short is his joy. He feels the fiery wound, flutters in blood, and panting beats the ground. Ah, what avail his glossy varying dyes, his purple crest and scarlet circled eyes, the vivid green his shining plumes unfold, his painted wings and breast that flames with gold. You see, the pheasant has sprung from the thicket, and the poor pheasant has been shot. And here, I'm sure you heard it, the music accelerates. The adjectives are piled up on top of each other, and we have perhaps much more passion than could be expected. The rules are not really followed here. Do we have measured feeling? Not quite sure, because there is a violent contrast between the beauty of this pheasant and the fact that it does not avail. Ça ne lui sert à rien. The poor pheasant gets killed. So you see, this great age of reason and reasonableness had nonetheless some true, genuine feelings still there. And if you really want to appreciate the poetry of that period, you have to reach for the feelings behind, beyond the polished heroic couplets. In the same line, a number of minor poets could be mentioned. John Dyer, or the fine opera librettist and satirist John Gay. But I prefer to end this section on poetry with the same, well, some have called it pre-romanticism, actually. I would call it early feeling for nature. It is detectable in the output of the Scottish poet James Thomson, who in The Seasons, written in blank verse, and The Castle of Indolence in Spenserian stanzas, began to bring relief to so much good taste and reasonable earnestness. He started to move away from that. His lines are sometimes exuberant. Here, for instance, you have a few snippets from his poem on spring. You see some people much later on, this is a frontispiece from a later edition in 1774, some people thought this was pre-romantic, and they portrayed the poet in typical pre-romantic fashion, the poet surrounded by nature. But oddly enough, he still has his very, very formal dress and his very, very formal chair planted at the foot of a tree.